Please stand by.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Carlo Bobilas, and I'll be your moderator for this session. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Bright, Logan, and Robert. But before I hand over the mic, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about today's presentation. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on demand after the live session. We're also streaming this on YouTube at the moment, but we'll provide some additional details at the end. During the session, we'd love to hear from you throughout the session, and if you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the question and answer panel, where our wonderful panelists are ready to respond. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and welcome Bright. Bright, over to you.
Thank you, Carlo. Hello, everyone. My name is Bright Mpasha. I'm the Customer Success Specialist for StealthWatch, aka currently now known as Secure Network Analytics. Welcome to our webinar. We'll be covering the secure in the cloud and developing a secure cloud analytics detection model. The intention, this webinar is intended to showcase the new and special features of the SCA product. The goal is to increase customer usage, engagement, and adoption. So in summary, Secure Network Analytics delivers industry-leading machine learning and behavioral modeling to help you protect against emerging threats in your digital business. Secure Cloud Analytics provides three primary functions. Number one, for example, network visibility and reporting. 2, identification of threats and indicators of compromise. 3, policy verification as well. Also, modern networks, especially those that rely on public cloud infrastructure, are by nature dynamic environments with numerous devices, elastic infrastructure, and extensive automation. To keep up with these dynamic networks, a strong threat detection needs to consume a variety of data directly from the infrastructure and an automated, low configuration, high efficacy threat detection engine. But the data isn't worth much if it's on its own. You still need a strong, effective, and easy to use threat detection engine that can alert you to only security relevant events. Secure Cloud Analytics accomplishes this with entity modeling. With that summary, I would like to hand over to my colleague Logan to take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Bright. And I'm going to share my screen here so I don't have to say next every time. All right, so first off, I'm Logan Bontrock. I'm a product manager focused on secure cloud analytics and focused in detection. You'll hear from Robert as well on the team later. I'll introduce him as we pass it over. So today we're going to be talking about a few different topics. One, we wanted to share some quick updates from Cisco Talos. It's a team we focus heavily with in developing new detections, but they release a quarterly report on what they're seeing in the wild, in particular the threat response team is seeing in the wild. So we wanted to share some of those insights. Wanted to give you a quick update on our strategy, research, and recent developments. And then Robert will finish us off with a deeper dive into our detections and some demos. Okay, so to kick things off here, so Cisco Talos incident response is a service that goes out and works with customers to, after the fact, help effectively investigate and respond to incidents. Cisco Talos is a pretty large organization. It's also got a heavy focus on threat research, threat intelligence, and this is where we partner with them in building our detections, but they also release these quarterly reports. If you haven't seen them yet, you can go to cisco.com and look for them and sign up for the emails. But they basically release these reports on a quarterly basis. This is from September, August, and July, I believe, is the last Q3 calendar year, and there'll be another one coming out here at the end of the year. So I wanted to share a few of the trends that we've seen from that organization, just to start things off here. As it's been the case for the last several quarters, ransomware was one of the top things that team found after they engaged with various customers. That was the top threat. Again, as we've seen over the last several quarters, the use of valid credentials was another critical observation, in that a lot of attackers are able to bypass a lot of security controls by getting someone's credentials, and that sort of relates to MFA being where they have seen sort of the gap in customers not deploying MFA, therefore able to use the valid accounts and credentials to get in as an initial attack vector was sort of the correlation they noticed. When we look at ransomware, there's a few things here. One, it made up nearly 40% of the threats they saw this quarter. So a very, very large portion of the overall, the many different threat actors out there, most of them were focused in on ransomware. With this, additionally, we'll dive into pre-ransomware in a second here, but there were many other focus areas, but we're going to pretty much focus on ransomware, pre-ransomware, and then malware as sort of where the kind of the theme I'm going to take here is talk about what Talos saw, and then I'm just going to briefly hit on a few points of where we focus as a product to try to help detect these threats. So that's kind of the theme here in sharing some of this. So diving into ransomware and pre-ransomware, one of the key things that they noticed around ransomware was there were quite a few of the initial behaviors that are indicative of ransomware without actually confirming ransomware, meaning there wasn't actually encryption seen in the customer environment, but it was often an attempt to, perform that next action. And that made up a very large portion of the overall ransomware that was seen. Some of the things we focus on as a product, so when we get deeper in the weeds here around ransomware, obviously there's a lot on the actual host that you can see from a behavioral perspective, such as credential harvesting, escalating privileges, really some of the things you might see on a device that we may not see on the network as a secure analytics product. But the one behavior that was really associated with pre-ransomware that we do focus in on is data exfiltration. And this was definitely the case where ransomware wasn't actually deployed, but exfiltration was one of the activities they did see, which indicates the adversary made their way in and they were able to interact with the environment enough to see, they've been compromised, maybe not full out ransomware deployment, but that was one of the key indicators that we're seeing. That definitely relates to an area of focus for visibility for us as a product. Lastly, I'll focus on just malware here from a threat perspective, in particular commodity malware. So the nice thing about this, the pros of this, being seen is it's a pretty well-known form of malware, these three types here. We've definitely seen these pop up over the last several quarters as a product when we look at connections that are made. And that's one of the big callouts here. So the reason a lot of these were spotted in the customer environment were just basic command and control activity, connections to malicious domains and IPs, which as a secure analytics product, these are all things we look for. So that was the main source of indication that these were the commodity families being used, were just the common connections we would see from these malware inside of a customer environment. And lastly, I'll touch on this, not because we as a product are necessarily heavily focused in this area. Certainly, we look at behavior, which can be indicative of a compromised account or compromised device that may be behaving anomalously on the network. But because it is such an important point, Talos has called it out again here. The use of valid credentials was the major source of infection. So it's no longer it's all the steps in getting those credentials, but also it's no longer that we can necessarily see somebody coming in from the outside necessarily busting into a web app, which was number 3 in the list. It's these are valid accounts, valid permissions, valid policies being followed, and those are really the front gate getting blown down. So that was the key indicator that led to a lot of those attacks we just talked about in the previous slides. So with that, those are sort of the initial vectors or the initial types of threats. I'm just going to really touch on some of the actions that we're seeing from Talos after compromise. In particular, some of the things that we really care a lot about, which are traversing the network. So this is an area where we really focus on visibility. So even if, as a customer, a compromise has occurred, our focus as a product is really being able to catch that compromise as soon as possible. So even if the attacker got through the first step of an attack, which is getting into the system or getting into our environment, maybe through a valid account, we want to be able to find that attacker as soon as possible, monitoring for abnormal behavior, malicious behavior. So potentially if security controller bypassed, being able to see those next steps. One of the things to call out here on traversing the network, so you'll see in the slides here, these are very centric to what we might see on an endpoint, some of those observations. But the other thing that Talos noted was RDP was one of the most common used protocols for lateral movement within a system. So that is something we look at in our product. We look at connections over port 3389, and we look for abnormal behavior from a network perspective, meaning lateral movement or exfiltration, which were both used by attackers in the last in those recent attacks I covered. Reaching out to C2, another very common behavior we see post-compromise. And again, just to kind of hit on this, from a secure analytics perspective, we're typically looking at both like two things. One, we're looking for C2-like behavior, so not necessarily finding an actual match to an IP or a domain, but we're also looking for those known domains and IPs that you may be reaching out to, as I mentioned with a lot of that commodity malware early on. So this was another common behavior they saw post-breach. And no surprise there, it's a very normal behavior we see in many different types of attacks. And then lastly, sort of the last three that they were called out around post-breach behavior: persistence, exfiltration, and evasion. So again, very common behaviors within an attack. And I think just a few things to call out here. When we look at monitoring for these various activities, we're again looking at it from a behavioral perspective. So we may not necessarily see behaviors on the host or inside the host, but we're looking a lot at the network perspective. And this is where we can look for behaviors like persistence, exfiltration, because we're actually monitoring traffic flows and data. So I just wanted to call that out, trying to put our product lens over it of where we really try to fit in and help our customers out. So with that, I'll start with a poll question here. And I think, do we, on the webinar team here, we have the polls all, there we go. I see Slido loading up here. Perfect. So one of the first poll questions we want to talk through is, these have all come from our Talos Threat Response team, from what they've been seeing on an individual customer basis, aggregating that data. Where are you as a team aligned from a top of mind perspective in your organization for the different types of threats occurring in the wild? So that's what we wanted to hear. Are you aligned to is this what you're seeing? Is this where you're focused? Or are you focused on other types of threats, other types of avenues of compromise or vectors of attack, for example? That was the first question. And we'll give it another, let's say 10, 15 seconds, and then we can move on to the next section here. All right, I'm gonna move on to the next section. Close this out. Sorry, you guys seeing that Slido? Probably are. Let me get rid of that. There we go. Okay, so that was just really an introduction. Wanted to share some of the data-driven highlights from our Talos team. Again, you can, there's many sources of data out there in the world. We look at a lot more than just Talos as well, but it's certainly something that we've got a big investment in at Cisco, and wanted to share some of the findings you can see in our quarterly threat reports if you don't follow those. All right, so pivoting over now to a little bit more about our product. I tried to highlight some of the high-level concepts as we talk through some of the top threats we've seen and where we focus, but I want to just do a deeper dive into the product just to either remind you, if you're an existing customer, about how the product works, but also, focus on where we're actually investing moving forward. So from a detection perspective, we are focused on 3 components: coverage, analytics, and actual detections as a result of the analytics. From a coverage perspective, we're heavily focused on getting as broad a visibility as we can across a customer's environment to really help them fill the gaps that they may have across their security portfolio. The beauty of this is the network gives you quite a bit of this intelligence to really connect the dots between your environments. As many of you know, the network, typically an adversary to reach their goals is going to have to touch the network at some point. So back to the previous slides when we talked about post-compromise behavior, a lot of that involves touching the network at some point in time once an adversary has made their way into the environment. And this makes a lot of sense. So when we look at where we're focusing on coverage from a critical or from a threat perspective, the public cloud, containers, on-premise networks. And we often ask ourselves, well, when we talk with our customers, where are their most critical assets they care about protecting? It, of course, is their employees. It, of course, is their various services they're using. But what's an adversary typically going after? They're going after something critical to the organization, the business, which is their data, their applications they may be hosting, their functional operational technologies that maybe live on a network, IoT. And these are often where we see things like ransomware showing up in the headlines, right? Maybe it's a sewage treatment plant that's getting into the network, or maybe it's a customer's data that has a bunch of customer credit card information, right? So coverage is really key to us, and that's where we focus a lot of our energy and attention from a detection perspective, making sure we have visibility to those environments where those critical assets live to help fill in the blanks from a security perspective so that it's easier to monitor. The next is the analytics. So having the coverage is a critical input, but in order to actually make sense of what's going on in those environments and help really complement other security products, especially those that are like an endpoint detection product or a firewall that's focused on a point, a point in this environment below, we do a few things to really complement those focus areas. One is we're baselining for anomalies. So being able to understand what's going on in this environment from a behavioral perspective can help both spot risks that may have occurred, like maybe changes to the environment that have opened up a new attack vector. Potentially, they can also help us spot more advanced adversaries that have made their way in, like we talked about earlier, that where initial compromises made. If we missed it, we can look for behaviors that could indicate something like movement of data across the environment or unusual access. From there, we also focus on behavioral threat. So a little bit of like behavioral threat is really looking at behaviors we see in the environment that are very adversary-like in nature, not just an abnormal, but also looking at events together that can give us an indicator of, well, this is something we see certain families of malware do from a software perspective, or is this something we see compromised accounts, the types of patterns they're going to interact with, and then like command and control type behavior. These are what we classify as behavioral threat indicators. And of course, lastly, I talked a lot about things like known command and control. We do look for those, given we can see the sort of pervasively the entire network. We look for those communications, whether they're bypassing existing security controls or going through something like maybe you're going to see the same alert from a firewall, for example. We still look for those indicators of compromise because we want to have sort of complete visibility where we can. Ultimately, this rolls back up to our alerts. So from this, some of the things our customers really focus on, we have 120 alerts across 14 minor tactics, but the key things our customers are often focused on are things like attacks from insiders or valid, usage of maybe someone's permissions to do something malicious behaviorally. Malware, of course, like I mentioned, looking for behavioral indicators of malware versus actually malware signatures. Same with ransomware. Crypto mining in the public cloud especially, we've got some unique detection there that looks for behaviors in the container environments and on the cloud infrastructure that potentially indicate, changes to infrastructure that can indicate something's being inappropriately used for crypto mining. And then lastly, a lot of our customers leverage our products for data exfiltration, whether the alert comes from our product or helping them confirm whether or not data had left their environment. Often a good place to check for that was their data transferred on the network? So that's also a very common focus. So that's a quick recap of just the detections. If you're familiar with those, you're probably familiar with, or if you're familiar with our product, you're probably familiar with a lot of what those detections were, but I wanted to kind of remind you where our strategy is focused and where we continue to invest there. One of the things I've never really shared with our customers in as much detail is how do we actually develop our detections? For those that have used our product on a daily basis, you might recognize some things here, but I just kind of wanted to give a brief touch on how are new detections actually developed and where do we focus our energy? So there are really three main focus areas where we, as a product, try to continue to enhance our detections. Whether that's, if you think about that previous slide, the coverage we provide, we try to expand our tactics and techniques we have visibility to by expanding our actual, environment we monitor, especially from a behavioral perspective, but also the threat landscape itself. So we try to take a combination of three things. One, our Talos team, we partner heavily with, who is out day-to-day performing threat research. I gave you a brief snippet of some of the things that they're seeing, but that team is really much deeper from a research perspective. And this is definitely an area where we, as we look to planning and updating our detections, we look a lot what's happening in the threat landscape and where can we really apply our product better, improve our product to help customers both reduce the noise in their system and increase the precision of finding, an adversary. And that's with a heavy partnership day-to-day with our Talos research team to test our product. And Robert will share some of this a little later in some of the demos, but also to help us plan, roadmap. Helpfulness is another part of the product. If you're familiar with this workflow, many of you who may have used the product have seen if you go close an alert, we actually ask you for feedback. This is something our research team monitors on a bi-weekly basis as well, where we go in and look at reports from customers to see what's been rated helpful, what hasn't been, what feedback have they given us, where have we had false positives, and we oftentimes are able to go follow up with those customers as well and see how we can improve the system. Lastly, new telemetry. So when we focus on growing our product and helping customers more, we have to focus on getting more telemetry. And the reason this is important is, as we see input from Talos and we get input from customers, often the way for us to improve an alert is not just update an algorithm, it's to expand into other attributes in the customer environment that can give us something like more precision or better efficacy to maybe who or fired the alert, like better device identification, for example. So it's really taking these three things in combination. This is what feeds our detection roadmap and our strategy. And it allows us to develop and enhance our existing detections or add new detections. And from there, we focus on a process of really validating those detections, proving their efficacy out, testing them in a lab against real attack scenarios, working with Talos, and then eventually publishing them to our customers. We really try not to publish these immediately unless there's something like an IOC or maybe a behavioral chain of events we can really, with high confidence, publish quickly. We try to test things out and make sure that they're not going to create a lot of noise. So with that, we've had some, in the last 3 months, we've had some recent updates to our product, and these are all available in the product UI. You can go look at a lot of the things we're releasing in the what's new section of the product or in our documentation on cisco.com. But we want to just kind of summarize to see, of all that stuff we just shared, these are the actual things we're developing quarter over quarter. So in the last quarter, we focused on, from a detection perspective, adding 2 new alerts, improving 8 alerts, and then adding new observations and device profiles and roles. The roles and the profiles are really what we use to feed our detections. as we improve like an understanding of what an environment is, that can actually have a result of improving the detection, reducing noise, improving efficacy, because it enables better identification of the devices in an environment. From an alert perspective, we had several improvements from existing alerts. A lot of that was from existing customer feedback, as well as continued efficacy testing in our lab environment to help prove out some of the things that we've been developing. And then lastly, we had 2 new alerts. And these 2 alerts are really around, one's in the public cloud, so looking at potentially a compromised admin account in Azure, which can indicate maybe a container environment's been hacked from the administrative control plane, or finding malware. So this is in a case where we're actually looking at Cisco firewall logs. The firewall may have not had a signature for malware, but we can look for some unusual user activity in the network telemetry, which can help us spot malware as well. A few more features that relate to detections that we wanted to call out. So I talked about expansion of telemetry as a key component of our detection strategy. And one of the things we were really trying to focus on is the on-premise environments. Historically, we've had the observable network appliance, or the ONA, that's collected our on-premise telemetry. This is great in that it's super simple, easy to deploy. But one of the challenges we've had is we can't get all the context easily up to the cloud environment to analyze that data. So we've added a new capability, a new sensor that will allow us to collect a lot more telemetry from networks, starting with more NetFlow, which there's 80 fields we didn't have before, we have now, that we can both use for investigation as well as for input to our detections. So these are simple things like, direction of the traffic, applications being used in the traffic, user information, if we have that from firewalls, for example. Quite a bit of simple context that we were missing before, we're really trying to make improvements on. Here's a quick example. You can actually, if you have this deployed today, you can see there's quite a bit more data than our traditional data fields that were in the event viewer before. And here we're focused on initially delivering a few things, which is really being able to identify the source of the traffic. So when our alerts fired, one of the biggest complaints we had from customers, rightfully so, was what part of my network did this come from? IP address often wasn't a good indicator. So we've started to add in the actual sensor and exporter on the network that device came from on-premise environments, and the same from public cloud environments. So we're able to now see which VPC, which cloud account, which cloud provider did this traffic come from as additional context, all with that focus of getting more telemetry into our product to make both detections better and investigation of those alerts more easy. The couple more slides here, and we'll pass over to Robert here shortly. Another feature that was added most recently was an integration with SecureX that enables the alerts coming from our product to be enriched and automatically published in SecureX, all with a sort of a back-end automation. So this is sort of a first step into many more integrations with SecureX as a product, but really the goal here is for us to take our findings and take our context from a network perspective and enable that to be correlated at SecureX with other events, whether they're from an endpoint product, a firewall, another like DNS security, for example, or Umbrella, or non-Cisco product. We're able to take our findings and take our context and try to pull it all together into a single workflow. So customers can correlate findings from different products and help prioritize, where investigations and reduce clicks to actually go and get context. I'm not going to jump into the whole SecureX workflow. There's quite a bit more to cover there, but one of the big changes was out-of-the-box integration there through publishing customers' alerts that they choose. And then lastly, to wrap up sort of what have we released detection related in the product in the last few months, visualization. So one of the number one asks from customers we've gotten was around visualization. In order to make the product more useful, especially investigating our alerts, we had to improve, data visualization. So there's much more to come here as we move forward in our plans, but initially you'll see some things in the product today in our device page. So if you want to go and investigate a device that maybe fired an alert, you can now see a lot more visualization around the traffic, including charts over time, trends over time to the traffic that device has received, as well as the connections that device has to other devices. And you can look, you can see this is much nicer to look at than a table of data. So quite a bit more to come on improving visualization, but that's on the device page, and that's most recently been updated. So with that, I was wondering, given I mentioned closing our alerts and rating alerts, for those customers who actually use our portal to investigate alerts, I wanted to ask, do you participate in closing and rating alerts in your SCA portal? And you can see I got a few questions there that yes or no, but I also, I'm curious if you feel like you want to give feedback and that's not the best mechanism. That's something else I'd love to know. All right, we'll give it another 10 seconds or so. And then I'm going to pass this over to Robert Harris. All right. All right, Robert, take it away. Do you want to drive the slides? All right, cool.
Thank you, Logan. I'll just share my screen here. So good day, everybody. My name is Robert Harris. I'm a technical marketing engineer for the Secure Analytics product suite. I focus on doing detections, and I have a background as a security researcher in here, so I really like to get down into the weeds with our detections. So what I'm going to do for you all today is do a bit of a detection deep dive here. So we're going to start off doing a quick overview about how do we actually arrive at a detection. In SCA, we refer to those as alerts, but how do we actually get there? And then I'm going to dig into two alerts that we have in a demo system that I think are particularly interesting, kind of show you what you would see in your own instance and explain what you can do and what you should see. And then we're going to talk about kind of different categories of alerts, and the ones that I think that we have that are kind of interesting or maybe kind of difficult to do in other methods than using SCA. And then we're going to take a look at a video series that I have been building on YouTube to help you do deep dives on more specific alerts. So let's start off with here just talking about how do we actually get to the point where we've got a detection where an alert has fired. Going to take you over into a demo portal that we have up here. And here you can see we've got 153 alerts that have fired in here recently. But let's just step through how did we arrive at those. So I'm just on the main dashboard in this Secure Cloud Analytics demo instance here. And the first graph you see here is our daily traffic, right? So over time, this is the amount of traffic that we're seeing both internally and externally, and we can track down this line and see at any particular point in time what type of traffic, or if we want to investigate a spike, something like that. But think of this as kind of being the raw telemetry that's coming in, right? We may have a variety of different sources. Maybe you have some on-prem sensors. You're using CTB, Cisco Telemetry Broker, to send that data up to Secure Cloud Analytics. Maybe you've got some workloads in 2 or 3 different public cloud providers, and you've got all those integrated in here. So this is kind of a summary of all of that traffic that's coming in. So it's raw. There's nothing's been analyzed on that traffic just yet. If we come down here, we've got a couple of other graphs, some top reports, our high-risk countries here. And at the bottom of our main dashboard, we see our observations. And you can see for this particular portal instance, we've got about 370,000 total observations. 2,200 of those came in just today. An observation is basically a notable fact about something that occurred on your network. So we're taking all that raw telemetry in, we're processing it. One of the first things we do is we create observations on it. And a good way to think about observations are here is something that we saw that we think is interesting. There's a variety of different types of observations that are available. In fact, if we come down here and go to view all observations, we can see a number of the more popular ones come up here. So we have like persistent external server, heartbeat observation, new external server, so forth and so on. And on these, there's a hover over here that if you want to take a look at these, you can get a description about these. So these aren't necessarily anything that is anomalous or malicious in and of itself. This is just something that we saw that we thought was interesting, and we broke that down into an observation. Now we start with the highlights here, so these are kind of the more interesting ones. You can also go over here and click on types, and you can see all of the variety of different observations that are available. And you'll notice next to the name there's a parentheses, and in the parentheses it'll tell you the number of observations that we have for your particular portal instance. So how do we actually go through and turn these into an alert? Well, let's go and take a look at the settings for the alerts and just take a look at what we've got in here. So I've gone over to settings and then gone to alerts in the portal here, and it brings us to this landing page. And here you can see we've got all of our alerts posted in here, and we've got the alert name. There's a description of the alert, and you'll notice if you start looking through this text in here, these are all going to say something like, this alert uses the session opened observation, right? Or this alert uses the traffic amplification observation. So once those observations have been processed and recorded, we then go and run some logic against them with our alerts. So we start with the raw traffic, we turn that into an observation, and then based off the observation, it rolls up into a final alert. So in this table here, we've got a number of pieces of information to really kind of help you understand the alerts in here. We give you the description in here. We're going to talk about the types of observations that are used in here. You could also navigate back over to the observation page that we were just on and hover over the info icon and get more information about that alert. If you click on this arrow to the left of the alert name, we're also going to give you some remediation advice in here. So whatever is going to be related to next steps as part of maybe an analyst taking a look at it, or an incident response investigation, or recommendations on what you could do to prevent this from happening in the first place, we'll provide that detail to you down here in the next steps. We're showing you the history requirements here. In the history requirements, we can kind of think of that as a baseline. Do we need any historical traffic in order to see a deviation from that baseline? And if so, how long does that take to build up before the alert will fire? So that's what we're seeing here. So for abnormal users, for example, we need a 36-day historical baseline. But for an amplification attack here, it's 0 days. So as soon as you turn up the instance, anything that says 0 days on it would be available to fire right away. We're going to show you the priority of the alerts, what you have as your current setting here. So we have low, normal, and high. We also point out the default priority here if you ever want to revert back to the default priority. Is the alert enabled or not? We have the toggle here in the default settings. If you've got your SecureX integration, which I highly recommend you do, you can set this to publish up to SecureX whenever that particular alert fires. Scroll over here just a hair. We have our telemetry column. So this is particularly interesting here. We call out and we tell you what form of telemetry is required for that alert to fire. So for the example of this first one, the anomalous user, we're using AWS API calls and Active Directory information. But for this amplification attack, we're using NetFlow, and specifically we're looking for north-south traffic. So as you scroll through these, it'll tell you all variety, AWS CloudTrail logs. We've seen, let's see here, Azure activity logs in here, right? So we've got the different cloud providers that are covered in here between AWS, Azure, and GCP. But then we also have over here in the last two columns on the right, the MITRE ATT&CK framework tactic category. And you can see if I hover over the name of the tactic category here, we're going to give you the tactic ID here and then the short description from MITRE. We've also got a link down here at the bottom. If you want to jump on over to MITRE, you can take a look at the full details for that tactic category. And we also have the more granular technique here as well with the same type of hover over here. So you can scroll through here, you can take a look at the different alerts, get all the information you need on those. But let's go and take a look at a couple of alerts that have actually fired in this demo environment here. So we're going to take a look at two of these that I think are pretty easy for everyone to understand. The first is geographically unusual remote access. So that fires off whenever we're seeing one of our internal devices being accessed from an external host that's located in a country that does not normally access our network. So if we're seeing something from maybe a suspicious country or just an anomalous type of country, that's how we're going to get that alert to fire. And the other one we're going to take a look at is vulnerable transport security protocol. So that's where we're seeing one of our hosts observed using some insecure version of SSL or TLS. So let's jump back over to our portal here, and we're going to go up to monitor and then alerts. And we're going to see a list of all of our currently open alerts. And you can see in this portal here, we've got a variety of different ones. We're going to start with this geographically unusual remote access alert here. So I'm going to click on that. And you can see when we come in here, we get the alert type details. It gives us the same description that we just saw a second ago over in the settings page. So again, in this case, we're looking for a remote host in an unusual country that's accessing a device in our network. We give you those remediation next steps, right? So here we're saying you should go through and look at the supporting observation, see if this is expected behavior or not, and if it's not, go through and update your firewall settings to block that behavior. We see our same mappings here to the MITRE attack framework. We have our alert priority here. We've got our alert rule details with the status, the alert ID. We've got some timestamps in here. We can come in here and we can assign it to somebody. If we want to add some tags in here, we want to post this up to SecureX Incident Manager, we can do that. We can also come in here and close the alert. On the right, we have the device outline. So think of this as being kind of a quick summary about the device that's in question. We're going to give you a number of different fields, show you what's been going on with that particular device over time here. So you can get just kind of a quick idea about some information about the affected device. And then we come down here to the supporting observations. So remember earlier I said we went from raw telemetry to observations, and then those rolled up into alerts. So these are the these are the observations that rolled up into the alerts. And you can see here we've got a Linux box that's being hosted in GCP on this example. And you can see the remote device. We do the GeoIP tagging here, and you have all the country flags in here. So we're seeing access, in this case over SSH, to this Linux box here that's being hosted in GCP from Hong Kong. We've got Nepal listed in here. We've got the UK, South Korea, Poland here. So depending on the nature of our business, this may or may not be usual activity. If we don't do business in these countries, or we don't have employees who are working that should be SSHing in from these countries, this would tip us off that maybe we've got some type of a problem in our firewall configuration that we really want to button up here. So then let's take a look at the next alert I wanted just to show you an example of something a little bit different. We're going to go back to our alerts here, and we're going to go to this vulnerable transport security protocol. So same format in here. We've got the alert type details in here. We're going to give you the description, the remediation next steps, the mapping to the MITRE attack framework, alert rule details with our timestamps, assignee, tagging it, escalating to SecureX Incident Manager. But now we're down here under the supporting observations, and this one we're using a different observation. We're looking at the insecure transport protocol. And what we've done here is we're using what's called enhanced net flow. Enhanced net flow is the net flow that's created whenever you enable ETA, or encrypted traffic analytics, in certain ETA-capable devices. The SNA flow sensor is an example of one of those. certain Catalyst 9000 series switches can produce ETA. Certain ASR and ISR routers can produce ETA, for example. So when that data comes in, one of the fields that we're going to be looking at is the protocol and the version that's in use. So in this example here, you can see we've got communications going on from, in this case, this looks like it's an AWS instance, to a host in the United Kingdom over port 443, and it's using TLS 1.0. Well, the current standard for TLS is 1.2. TLS 1.0 is considered to be insecure. So when we saw that occur, we rolled that up into one of these insecure transport protocol observations. And then we had a series of these observations that rolled up into the alert. So that's what you're going to see when you're going through looking at the alerts in the portal here. So we've gone through these two as just kind of a quick demo. I want to talk real quick about the types of alerts we have. We saw the telemetry column. We saw data coming in from various different sources, right? So we're going to be looking at public cloud alerts, and I've called out some of the ones that I think are more interesting in this left-hand column here. So those are going to be coming from the cloud providers. In the middle, we've got our private network and on-prem monitoring, and I've called out some of the ones that I think are a little bit more interesting that we do. Those are going to be coming from NetFlow data, right? So you're going to be generating that in your campuses, your branch offices, your data centers, from your endpoints, things like that. And then in the last column, we have our firewall logging. So Secure Cloud Analytics has a feature we can enable called Security Analytics and Logging, or SAL, or you may hear it referred to as SAL SAS. And we're going to be sending things like connection, file, malware, and intrusion events from Cisco, FTD, and ASA firewalls up to Secure Cloud Analytics. We're going to run our analytics engines on those. We're going to roll those up into observations and eventually into alerts. And you can see I've called out a number of the more interesting alerts that would come from firewall logging and monitoring inside of Secure Cloud Analytics. I also want to mention I have created a detections demo series on YouTube. So it's a series of videos where I go through and pick out individual alerts and do a deep dive into those. So I kind of go through and showcase the work that we're doing. I work through an actual alert by looking at a product demonstration, and we do real-world attacks on a system. And we kind of cover everything as a specific life cycle and give you some additional insights and tips into that. So I'll call out things that you may want to be aware of whenever you see a particular alert fire. We've got a playlist on YouTube. I'll go over here and show you that real quick. Right now, I've got 7 videos that I've created in here. I'm going to be slowly adding more to this series over time. But I've got an intro video that explains how the format of all the videos. And then we just have individual alerts that I thought were interesting that we've called out here, where again, we go through and do a deep dive into those. You can see each of these videos are usually somewhere in about the 4 to 5 minute range going through those. So I hope you all learned something about the way that the detections work inside of Secure Cloud Analytics here today. Let's move on to our third and final poll question. So we want to know, how can we better communicate new features and content such as demos to you? And that you'll see that opening up in your Slido window inside of WebEx there. So if you would please take a moment to go through and select an answer to that question, and then click on send. So while everyone is going through and doing that, I do want to show here, we've got a slide here where you can learn more about today's topics. So this slide will be available to everyone as we publish the webinar and the slides. That usually takes about a week to get that up and published. And Carla will send a link out in chat to show everyone where they can go and find the webinar and the slides once it is published. And with that, let's move into some Q&A here. So I'll turn it over to Carlo.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Robert, Logan, and Bright. If you do have a question for our speaker, please feel free to use the question and answer. Our speakers, apologize. Please feel free to use the question and answer panel, and we'll get those answered accordingly.
Yeah, and Carlo, I can summarize one we've seen so far. So we presented earlier on the additional data we get from on-premise, and we're sort of in a weird state right now, so it might be good for me just to rehash the question. We had a question about it being, is our CTB a free sensor, and is it going to replace our ONA? So the short answer is, for now, the ONA and CTB are, they can coexist. They're two different devices we use to collect on-premise telemetry. Over time, we'd like to replace the ONA with the CTB because it's going to offer a more scalable platform for us to add more data, more capabilities, like sensor capabilities. So what that really means is we're in a sort of a transition state now where we want it to be a free appliance, just like the ONA is. In order to get there, we're actually leveraging CTB is actually an existing Cisco product. Some customers buy it for brokering telemetry between environments, and we're basically just leveraging that technology stack to really create an ONA 2.0 or a better ONA. So it's kind of in a weird state now in that it's a paid product from Cisco. So right now we only offer it for free for new orders of SCA. So if you buy Secure Cloud Analytics, you order it, you can actually go and add and tack on CTB if you want to use that to get the new data. We realize a lot of these features I just shared had come from existing customers. So the next step is, well, how do we get existing customers to migrate over to CTB, keep it free? And a big part of that's going to be integrating the CTB into the management or the SCA portal so that you can manage it, you can upgrade it, and licensing won't be something we focus on charging like we do for our CTB as a standalone product. So that's sort of the next phase of planning.
Awesome, thank you. There was a question that came in about where would the training videos or this recording. I'm actually going to go ahead and let's see if I did. Actually, I did. Paste the link to where the recording will be uploaded. It's in the chat. It's going to be on the Cisco Learning Network under the Secure Cloud Analytics Training Videos page. What's great about that page is definitely do bookmark it, as you can actually sign up for future sessions along with just watch previously recorded sessions there. And I also included the post-webinar discussion thread for today's session on there. So definitely, if you do have any other questions or if you'd like to continue the conversation, please jump into that link on the Cisco Learning Network. Okay. Logan, Bright, Robert, is there anything else you'd like to say? It looks like we've covered all the questions for today. Before we start to wrap up?
No, thanks for everyone's time. And if you have further feedback or questions, we're happy to engage and discuss from the product team. So definitely reach out.
Awesome. Yeah, just have some feedback in the chat saying thank you. Awesome. All right. Well, I want to thank our presenters, our panelists, and the entire team for bringing their knowledge to the Cisco community. Again, if you have a question, I'll keep the Q&A window open for a couple more minutes, or you can just join that conversation that's in the link, or the link itself is in the chat. For even more tutorials, demonstrations, and future webinars, please do visit the Cisco Learning Network. At this time, you'll be directed to a survey, so your feedback is important, and we do encourage you to take the time to participate. Once again, we thank everyone for joining us today, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.